not locked in here with you. You're locked in here with me.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebel Broker, licensed real estate broker in the state of California. Also, member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, don't hold that against me. Thank you so much for spending your valuable time with me today. I hope everything's going well for you. The market is definitely doing interesting things. We're not seeing things going into sort of a tailspin. In fact, we've actually seen, instead, we're not talking about downturns, right? We are in most markets continuing to talk about slowdowns. So in other words, less growth over the same comparable time last year, year-to-year comparison, which is always the best numbers to use, by the way. Month to month is potentially distracting because there are seasonal influences you need to take into effect. What I thought I would do, we're heading into that time of year when deals are normally to be found. Now, in some markets, that is more true than others. Here in my local market, things are still continuing to go at a pace that's interesting. In other words, not a downturn. We're not seeing that big switch over from being a seller's market to being a buyer's market. It is definitely far more balanced than it has been in past seasons, but I'm still not seeing that giant rush towards becoming a buyer's market. Now, sub-markets, that's a little bit more true. But what that equals for us, for folks who are kind of interested in how to navigate the sea of real estate, is that means really we're getting into an opportunity now, or a market where that presents us with an opportunity to potentially find deals. And no matter who you are, you want a deal, right? Whether you're a first-time buyer or you are a investor, first-time buyer looking for your first home, first-time investor, experienced investor, it's all about the timing and the know-how to find those good deals. And a lot of it starts at the macro level. Now, we've on this show talked a lot about micro things. In other words, exact ways to take a look at markets, figure out what you're comfortable with, and move from there. But it's always good to get more of a macro view. So I thought we'd step back and cover two areas of the country where where you're going to find your best deals for homes, and you're going to also find your tendency towards better deals for vacation properties. Two very different ways of going. Now, in our first category, everybody will be interested, right? Whether you're an investor or looking for that first home. If you have flexibility in where you live, depending on what your personal career is, it might be one of those situations where you're not married to a physical location. Now, on that subject, now I realize I tend to get distracted sometimes by the shiny things, and this might be one of those cases, but it's also amazingly interesting to talk a little bit about how things are changing in California. California is, no matter what you think of California politically or what it does or doesn't provide, I mean, California is a beautiful state. And I've lived here. I was born here, raised here, went to college here. I've spent a few years in other states or overseas, and California is beautiful. So that's what keeps people here. What doesn't keep people here are the other things, the things controlled by man, right? And for those of you who aren't aware, we just went through a scenario where the Pacific Gas and Electric Company, and that's what controls the utilities here in California, turned off the electricity to a huge chunk of Northern California. Now, for those of you who follow my Twitter feed, you know I am primarily a real estate data guy when it comes to my Twitter feed. I don't get into what my favorite lunch is or my cutest pet or any of those types of things. And I typically don't get terribly political on my Twitter feed. But I have to tell you, they turned off the power in Morgan Hill. And I thought, okay, no problem. I'm sure the reason why the power is off, because the circumstances didn't exist to make sense as to why the power was being turned off in Morgan Hill. And I thought, all right, it must just be an upstream thing. I had someone on Twitter comment, hey, it's not about you. It's something upstream from you, from the power. And that was something I'd thought about. So I went and I checked, and sure enough, only part of Morgan Hill had its power off. So if you draw a line from where I am to where the power is on, A, it's not that far away. B, it's in the same city. So in order for this to make any kind of sense, you have to assume that there was some other motivation for turning off the power. So I started looking things up and down and figuring out what are the dangerous things. Now, high winds was the stated concern, but also very low humidity. And according to the data I saw, humidity below 35% is considered dangerous. Temperatures above 85%, or 85 degrees, 90 degrees. That's if you're being generous. But winds, estimates range depending on who you're talking to, but I would say it absolutely has to be over 25 miles per hour for it to be even considered dangerous. If you have an electric company that can't manage 25 mile per hour winds, your electric company is being run by morons, right? So what was the situation in Morgan Hill at the moment they turned off the power and for the hours leading up, right? Because you can also make an argument that, well, hey, they were seeing the circumstances that would indicate a problem ramping up, so they decided to go ahead and turn off the power. At the time that the power was turned off and for the hours leading up, wind wasn't higher than 2 miles per hour. I think it gusted up to 5. Humidity was 58%. And at the time I was checking it, the temperature was about 64. No logical reason whatsoever to be turning off the power. And then you realize this is probably not an actual safety thing. And what was particularly interesting about it is at the time this was going on, people were going to be getting up to commute, right? I was getting up because I had to do some things early in terms of making some things happen and which all got canceled because the power was out. But in any event, the very first thing I went to do was make light. Well, I'm sure 85% of the people who were diligent about putting a flashlight away for the next earthquake or whatever else went and grabbed that flashlight and discovered the batteries were dead. And next thing you do is use the thing that doesn't require batteries. You light a match and you light a candle, or you light a lantern, or whatever it is you've got. So in order to protect us from fire, PG&E basically created circumstances where for thousands and thousands of Northern Californians, they needed in their wooden homes to light fires so that they could see. Take us back to the days when one of the number one causes of death was people catching on fire. I was a history major, sorry. So women catching fire, for instance, when we're cooking in an open flame was the main thing. But the point being, in order to avoid a safety situation, they created a poor safety situation. Granted, that's not true when the sun comes up. Everything should be fine then. But for that period of time when folks are getting up, which is when the power was off, the situation was poor. So what was going on there? And why am I going so much into this? Well, one, it annoyed the hell out of me. I am perfectly fine with decisions made with rational data in place. If I cannot track the stream of decision making, I get annoyed because it tells me something is going on that we don't know about. So if you look into it, you discover that PG&E is, and because PG&E, obviously grids are very difficult to make private companies, right? You don't get to pick different power companies typically. Boy, would I love that. If anything has ever occurred that should tell people we need less government involvement with generating power, not more, it has been this experience. If there was a competitor in the scene to provide electricity to all of the people in Northern California, this would not have happened. No doubt about it. Everyone would have simply switched providers or whatever. And I realize that's, there aren't 5 different power lines coming to your house so that 5 different providers can provide you electricity. I'd love to come up with a way to make this a open market. Smarter men than I have tried and failed. But in any event, the point is that they're going to try to raise rates here in California. They've been talking about it forever. They lost, I don't even know how many billions of dollars last year because of all the fires that got started, because of poor maintenance on lines and transformers and other kinds of wonderful things. But the point I'm making here is there are so many things now feeding a beast of dissatisfaction in California that I'm seeing a lot of people, when I talk to them about listing their homes, that's the conversation we're having. We're talking about taxes. We're talking about the cost of gas. We're talking about the commute. We're talking about how much it costs to buy a house. Now we're talking about being forced to sit in your house in the dark for 2 days straight. It is annoying a lot of people, and PG&E may have thought they were making some sort of a political point and saying, hey, well, when we don't get the rates we need, this is what happens. And the reverse is happening. What's happening is I'm finding a lot of folks who are reaching out and saying, we're kind of done. We could go ahead and install a backup generator. And I bet backup generator guys are making a mint in the coming week as folks decide that they're going to go ahead and do that. But the reality is these are all things that are negatively affecting California. And so the reason I mention this, California is already a ridiculously difficult market to get into, not all of California, particularly Silicon Valley. But what this does is feeds that beast of folks who want to go to other places. So I think that if you are someone looking to invest, one of the first things I would look at would be what are other places in the country that would be a clear competitor to what Silicon Valley has to offer. Oh, and remember that statistic that we've covered for so long? I think I may have mentioned this in a relatively recent show. But over the past few years, I've been covering this one on a regular basis as the stat comes out. Now, when we talked about this last time, I believe the hard data was 49% was a year ago. What's interesting is those numbers were Silicon Valley residents. Now, I've come across a poll that was shared on CNBC that does a statewide poll. So this isn't just the folks in Silicon Valley. This isn't just folks who would want to move out of the area. This is folks who want to leave the state of California. And that number now sits at 53%, who say not only that they want to, but that they're seriously considering it, which is a jump from the 49% that we talked about on this show a year ago. So what the picture I'm trying to paint here is that there is opportunity. Now, if you believe that this has got legs and this is going to move and that we're going to start to see an uptick, and we already have, I shared an article a few months ago that showed a definite uptick in the number of companies moving out of the state. Now, in the vast majority of those tended to go to places like Texas, Boise, a couple to Phoenix. But the point is that there's going to be general pressure, general growth in other marketplaces that are clear competitors to the local market. And so what are some of those clear competitors? Well, one of them is going to be tech. So if you're somebody who works in tech, if you're a programmer, if you're a website creator, if you're a JavaScript guy or a Python guy or a backend guy or an ops guy, these are all people who can live anywhere. So there's a double-edged sword here. You're going to get people who are going to leave the state and move to these areas for jobs in those areas, because that is filtered on the idea that there will be companies that go to these locations, physically move. All right, so that's group A. Group B is people who will not change companies, but will agree to work remotely. So they're still going to work for ABC Computing in Sunnyvale, California, but they're going to be remote. Which means, and we have tons of folks doing that, you should see the number of flights that come in from Portland every morning, packed to the gills with people who literally commute from Portland to Sunnyvale on a jet plane a couple of days a week. I know of folks who are managers at computer companies, so they're people managers, who don't come into the office but once a month, and they live in another state. And they use video conferencing to manage most of their stuff and to do their one-on-one meetings with their direct reports and all those other kinds of things. So the gears are all moving in that direction, and the willingness of corporations to have folks work remotely is growing every year. This is going to feed a lot of different marketplaces. Now, I think the ones that will benefit first will be the ones closest to Silicon Valley. Right? So Portland, pretty close. Not way close, but pretty close. Anything right on the other side of the border, there's a town just south of Reno. Well, I don't know if it's officially in Reno, but some of the biggest companies have built buildings there. So Google, Facebook, some of the big tech companies have built facilities there. Are a potential. And I've had really kind of heated conversations with people about whether or not it makes sense to do that, to invest in those communities. And it's going to take you looking at the reality on the ground and figure out whether it makes sense to you. But what I wanted to do is also point out some of these other areas. This is specifically from Redfin. This was an article that came, was there a date on this? October 10th of this year. So just a couple of days ago. And they're basing it a lot on job growth. And the great thing about this is it's also mixing this idea that this is for folks who want to spend less than 20% of their income on housing, right? Here in Silicon Valley, paying 40% of your income on housing is not unusual. So, you know, the impetus here is huge. And as we move further down the political spectrum, there is no sign of it going away. In fact, given all the things that folks like the governor of California are talking about and other folks, they are going to want to pay for more and more stuff, which just means more and more taxes. And if their healthcare plan goes through, it's going to require at minimum a quadrupling of taxes that'll be taken from somewhere. And there's a lot of theories where that's going to come from. There have been talks about how it's going to get hit, about homeowners getting hit hardest. That's a creepy thought. Homeowners are already, in my opinion, overtaxed given what they get. But let's go ahead and hit some of these. I think that there's potentially some pretty interesting opportunities here, particularly because the barrier to entry on some of these is ridiculously low. So let's go ahead and start at the top of our list. And this list is ordered by the year-over-year job growth for software engineers. Now, you can say, well, I'm not a software engineer. Well, okay, you're not a software engineer. That's fine. There are a ton of careers that involve tech and other things, just sort of even tangentially related to tech, that this would cover. So maybe you're not a code jockey. Maybe you don't write the code that makes the application work. But if you are someone that's in ops, who doesn't have to flip a switch, and you can remotely just go and access the servers and restart them when needed, or when, you know, the folks who need to be on call at 2 a.m. local time to make sure everything's going to be okay. There's tons of different opportunities here. Okay. And from the standpoint of people who want to live, right? If you're just a buyer, if you're someone who wants to live in a house and you're able to swing a deal either where you can find, and the other thing why this is important is also because of the job growth. So remember, this is great for folks potentially who want to invest. This is great for folks potentially, since we're seeing job growth in these specific job areas. These might be cities you should consider. Maybe find out what computer companies or tech firms are located there, if you still feel like you need to be a guy who goes into the office, or approach your current employer if you're here in California or some other crazy place that's too costly to live, and talk about relocating. And as an investor, these represent an opportunity to you because they're likely to be magnet communities with exactly the kind of folks you want to rent to, right? Tend to be good income, tend to be stable. You know, in my experience, this is a great category of folks to rent to. So let's start with the first one, with 4.1% growth in software engineers over the last year. Charlotte, North Carolina. Charlotte is a pretty big one. Now, I've mentioned that years and years ago, I worked for Apple, and the Apple office where my boss lived or worked was Charlotte, North Carolina. Now I was in Southern Florida. So there's that. But it's one of those situations where this has already had a very established tech presence for a super long time. So it doesn't surprise me that Charlotte is on this list. Now, what else is awesome about Charlotte? The median income for a software engineer there is $80,000, which actually isn't ridiculously high, frankly. However, if you are someone who currently works for a company where you're making $120,000, $130,000, $140,000, usually in Silicon Valley, starting pay for a programmer, depending on, you know, there's things they do to test you. But if you're a programmer, most of the programmers I know who are even fresh out of college, I had a gentleman I was talking to a while back who was only 2 years out of college, who was hired as a computer science guy, computer software engineer, who was making $125,000. So that's food for thought. Definitely nice to be able to move to a place if you're going to work remotely where your money is going to buy more and you make more than the average person. Now, the median home sale price in Charlotte, North Carolina is $269,000. Monthly housing payment for median priced home is $1,257. Percentage of a software engineer's income is necessary to afford a median price home, only 18.9%. And that assumes you make the $80,000. Share of homes for sale affordable on a software engineer's budget, the majority, 62.9%. Now, what's great about this is you could go in there as an investor. There's going to be different niches. Obviously, you'd want to get some ground truth and start doing some of the things I've suggested in past shows as it relates to navigating a marketplace from your desk without having to physically go there. And then once you have narrowed it down, make a physical trip. Now, for those of you who've been listening to the show a long time, you know that Trulia was my go-to site because it had that crime overlay that you could do. And I'm a guy who likes to be aware of that. I like to avoid higher crime areas. Go figure. No longer does Trulia do that. I have given them my feedback with that was a huge mistake. That made Trulia my go-to website as a screener of investment properties. They still do the criminal overlay, but only when you're looking at a specific property. So you can't see the results on a map and then do the crime overlay over that to see which properties you want to focus on. What is the new site that does that? Believe it or not, Realtor.com. So finally, Realtor.com asks for feedback from agents all the time, and I've been listing off all the reasons why they suck for the last 2 years. All these other sites were beating them up at the game they should be the best at. Remember, Realtor.com is owned by the National Association of Realtors. It is directly plugged into the nation's MLSs. It should be the flagship of what people get. And it is only now finally offering features that I think make it the number one place to go for investors and anyone really who wants to get the most information at their fingertips when they're looking at a large number of properties. So that's what I'm doing now. I have migrated all of my searches over to Realtor.com for areas that I don't have MLS access for. So anything outside of Northern California predominantly. And I suggest all of you do the same. Okay, anyway, so it's got the data you're going to need to make a remote estimation of the markets that make sense to you. Now, we're going to go ahead and talk about the rest of the properties, rest of the areas that came up on this list. We're going to take a quick break, so don't go away. We'll be right back. Are you ready to jump in and start your search for your first investment property? Maybe you've decided that it's time to own your own home, or maybe you're ready to sell your home and move on to something new. No matter what your goal is, the Rebel Broker can help. That's right. Aside from hosting this show, I am also the owner broker of Whitelaw & Sons Real Estate Services right here in Silicon Valley. With over 25 years experience serving Silicon Valley, Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy, I or one of my great agents can help you achieve your goals in real estate. So if you're ready to look into taking that next step towards achieving your real estate goals, point your browser at www.soldbyrobert.com. That's www.soldbyrobert.com and get in touch. Let me show you how I will earn your business and your respect. Again, that's www.soldbyrobert.com, or you can call me at 408-852-0525. California Bureau of Real Estate ID 00984-909. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. We are talking about good places to invest. We're going to try to hit some of the highlights here. This data is coming to us from Redfin, from an article early in October. We've already talked about Charlotte, North Carolina, which represents a pretty good opportunity. There are other ones here, though, that are better in terms of having a lower barrier to entry, and I think that's an excellent option. So let's go ahead and jump into those. Number 2 on our list at the same rate, which is Buffalo, New York, in terms of year-over-year job growth, same number as Charlotte, 4.1%. Median income is a little less, though. According to this, it's $71,500. I would be hard-pressed to see that number just blows me away. It's just because so many of the folks I've worked with over the last few years are software developers. And I got to tell you, on average, they're making twice that here in the Bay Area. God, which spells such an opportunity for those folks, right? I mean, for those of you I know I've got quite a few computer folks who are listening to the show. If you are working for Apple, Apple's tougher. Their policy on remote workers is at least it was last time I talked to someone about it, not that great. But I know Facebook has got folks who are doing this. I've helped these guys sell their homes here, and while they've moved up north or to the next state over. Google, I know, has some remote folks. a couple of smaller companies you might not know of. So it's not a totally unheard of thing, but imagine not getting a pay cut, working something out where you could work from home, and maybe they're going to have you come in once every 2 weeks or once a month, which is typical. I mean, there are some guys I know who are coming once a week, but on average, the guys I talk to are coming in once every other week or more frequently once a month with no pay cut. Imagine doing that from Buffalo, New York, which I agree is difficult. I mean, when you're that many hours different from the place where everyone's working, it makes it more difficult. But imagine only paying $170,000 for your house, with your monthly payment being $795, where your housing expenses are only 13.3% of $71,000. Now let's extrapolate that. All right, let's say you are a person looking to go move to one of these areas, and you currently work in Silicon Valley, and you're making that $140,000 a year. If you were to make this move, the amount you would be paying from your income towards housing would be 7% of your take-home pay. That would be pretty epic, wouldn't it? I mean, that would just be phenomenal. Anyway, okay, so the number of homes that sold that were affordable for on the income they stipulate of $71,000, 76.3%. So the vast majority. So that spells a marketplace to me that has a lot of homes at this price range that could be an amazing deal for you. So I think it also spells an opportunity for folks who want to rent. There are some folks who simply don't want to buy, and that's fine too, but you can step in as that investor to provide that home. Next, Grand Rapids, Michigan, 3.7% year-over-year growth in software engineering jobs. $70,000 a year is the income they project here, and the median home sale price is $217,000, with 17.4% of a software engineer's pay going towards housing, where 64.7% of the homes in the market are affordable at that pay rate. Next, Colorado Springs at 3.4% job growth for software engineers. Median income $87,000. Median home sale price $320,000. And the stipulation, though, there is that's El Paso County, Colorado, where Colorado Springs is located, where your income then is 20.6% will be taken up by housing. 52% of homes fall into that affordable category. Now, that's an interesting set of numbers, right? Slightly fewer folks. It might indicate that you could get in, but it's also got that higher barrier of entry in terms of cost of the property. Looking at these numbers, Charlotte and Buffalo really look sexy. Next on the list is Columbus, Ohio, with 3.1%, $76,500 is the income that they are projecting. $229,000 for a median home. 16.8% of software folks could afford it, and 60.7% of the homes on the market would be affordable by folks in that income range. So all good stuff. Now, the last two locations they put on this list are I don't think they make sense. Maybe Seattle does. Seattle is the next one on the list. And I think they simply make the list because of the growth in employment. In San Francisco, we're seeing weird numbers. In the Bay Area, we're seeing weird numbers where we're not just seeing people leave, right? So it's not a question of people being fired. We're now in a mode where jobs are leaving. So in other words, people are relocating out of the state and jobs are going with them. So it's not like someone else comes and replaces a lot of these jobs that are being lost in the state. Obviously, San Francisco is a ridiculous place to try and get an investment property. The median home price is $1.42 million in San Francisco. The median home price in Seattle, Washington is $565,000. Now, I've been to Seattle. I've cruised around that area, and frankly, it's a tough one. Now, it's more competitive now. I think there are deals that you can find in Seattle and the greater Seattle area. But for my money, if Seattle has some of the exact same problems the Bay Area does in terms of traffic. If you're not on the island, man, I'll tell you, I've been in commute traffic around Seattle on the wrong side of the bridges as folks are going to and coming out of that area. And it is a huge pain in the butt. So the value of living on the island is so gigantic that your best bet is to try and be a investor in that space. But it's a higher barrier to entry. That $565,000 they're talking about is not just for Seattle itself. It's for the broader area. And if you start wanting to find a home to buy, it becomes a much more complicated and expensive proposition. Now, before I get people reaching out to me talking about how it's not an island, I get it's not an island, but there's enough big water that it may as well be, right? Or you have to go ridiculously far north or ridiculously far south to get into Seattle. But if you go and you do a quick search, I always jump to that 3-bedroom or more search, and you sort of look at the area right around there, and you can go as far as the Northgate area, the northern end, which has its own set of challenges relating to bridges and whatnot. And it really depends on where you live, where work is for you, I'm sure. I actually kind of think that northern chunk is actually even more interesting in a lot of ways. But if you do a search and you want to look through, most of the numbers I'm seeing here are over $1 million. Are there ones lower? Yeah. Some of them present an interesting proposition. I see one here for $585,000, for instance, that is 3 bedrooms. And as I'm doing this, I'm on realtor.com and I'm looking for areas of lower crime as I'm browsing. This $585,000 for a 3-bed, 1-bath, 1,200 square foot home, not bad, but I sure would want to look into being able to make that a 2-bath. With 3 beds without 2 baths, that makes it far less desirable. But there are some beautiful places here, I'm sure. The other thing that's interesting, as I look through this, just as a side note about Seattle, I do not see a single property showing that's a 3-bedroom or greater with an indicator that the price has gone up. I am seeing properties indicating that the price has been reduced. In every case that I'm seeing, it's for properties over $2 million. So that fits in with what we've talked about before, where the prices under stress the most are at the higher range. Here's one that's listed for 1.19 that is listed as recently reduced. But as soon as we get up right around Green Lake, Finney Ridge, those areas, you start to get into some more reasonably priced places. And by reasonable, I mean under $1 million, 617,000, 610, 765. And this is the way and just to throw this out there, this is the way I love to start, right? So this is what I do when I'm looking for an investment location. I will zoom way out. I will turn on that crime map and I look for the lighter colored areas. It's as simple as that. That also happen to be in areas that I think would be desirable, where people would want to live. And in this case, commuting and traffic and all that other kind of stuff becomes a huge issue. So just kind of look around. I'm seeing areas like around Magnolia, Queen Anne, Volunteer Park, Laurelhurst. A lot of areas here that would be super sexy. And then use the tool, zoom in. You'll start to see more detailed information on the properties. And then start looking for homes that fit your needs. All right, and of course, San Francisco answers itself. We've already talked about San Francisco in terms of not wanting to be a place to drop your money. I think that continues to be true. I think if you, you have to have so much cash. You'd be much smarter to take that piles and piles of cash that you're going to have to invest in San Francisco and invest it in buying 4 or 5 other properties in other more promising communities around the country. So right now, it's a thumbs down for me on buying in San Francisco. Things are going to have to change a little bit more before that opinion changes. All right, folks, my original lofty goal was to also talk about the hottest vacation home markets, but I'm going to save that for another show. So today we'll just talk about single-family residentials or great communities where you can get a great deal that are seeing a lot of growth in particularly the tech sector. And as an investor, the tech sector is one of your best friends. I like education. I like tech. Those are all great things. So consider this a little bit of an insight into where you might want to direct your attention as an investor. Thanks again for listening, everyone. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to what I have to say about these subjects. The goal is always to leave you with far more knowledge on the table than you've invested in time. Hope we've achieved that today. Thanks, everyone, and I'll talk to y'all next time.